Today, I'm going to try and keep it short. I'm going to take you through my favorite groove. The groove I love the most. I don't play a lot of chops. I don't play a lot of fills. I do play a lot of grooves. And this one, for my money, this is the one I'm going to if I have to play one. So I'm going to show you what the groove is. I'm going to break it down a little bit. I'm going to show you what the most important part of the groove is. That's what we're going to focus on. I'm going to show you an exercise, a practice that I do a lot that helps me form grooves like this. So let's get into it. All right, I kind of lost it a little bit at the end. Tried to do an extended fill. It didn't work out. But that doesn't matter. The important part is the groove. What came before that mess at the end. The groove. And grooves similar to that. That's my favorite. I love those kind of grooves. And what sets those apart from other drum grooves you might play is what you're doing on the hi-hat. You see some variation on the snare. You see variation on the bass drum when I'm playing this groove, right? I change that sometimes, and that's okay. But the thing that never changes or changes very infrequently is what's happening on the hi-hat. And what's happening on the hi-hat is it's 16th notes, but they're played in groups of 3, all right? And of the 3 hi-hat hits, the third one, the last one of the grouping, is always accented. So it sounds like this. Right, that is consistent throughout the groove. If you'll notice, sometimes I break off and just play 8th notes. So a lot of times I usually play the groupings of 3. And sometimes at the end of what you'd call maybe a measure, I break off and just play 8th notes, accented. Usually they're all accented, which is fine. But majoritively, you're going to be sticking pretty strictly to that group of 3 on the hi-hat and that accent as well. The most important thing is the accent. So I'm going to play the groove again a little slower. Focus on what I'm doing on the hi-hat, because that, as I said, is the most important part. What you're doing on the snare, what you're doing on the bass drum, that's what you're doing for a lot of other grooves. Most all other drum beats, right? That stays pretty consistent, and you know it's interchangeable, and you substitute in ghost notes and accents on those 2 instruments frequently, but the consistency lies with what you're doing on the hi-hat. And if you can get that hi-hat feeling good and strong, that's what's going to make the groove. So I'm going to play it again and slow it down a little bit, and then I'm going to show you an exercise that I do to sharpen the hi-hat groupings. Okay? And now basically the same thing sped up a little bit, because why not? All right. Yeah, I love that groove. It's great. It feels great to play. And I think it all comes down to that hi-hat grouping. So how do we go about strengthening that feel? Because it's basically the same thing with eighth notes. If you're playing an eighth note groove, it's fairly simple on the hi-hat, but you got to lock in that timing. You got to lock in the feel, especially if you're playing accents. It's the same thing. So I can show an eighth note groove. This is what I would be traditionally doing on the hi-hat. So, again, it comes down to those accents. What makes that feel good is the accent. If I just played straight eighth notes, this is what that same thing would sound like. But by adding that accent, we get so much more flavor, if you want to call it. So let's do that again. Right. So that's where the groove comes from, right? That's what makes it feel good. It's the same thing with those groupings of three. Because I can play the groove that I like a lot without that hi-hat accent. And this is what that sounds like. Why not? Let's do it. It's kind of hard for me to play it that way because it doesn't really click. I really need that accent to establish that feel. So again, let's hear how much better it sounds, in my opinion, with that accent. So again, it's the smallest things, right? It's the smallest things with drumming that make it sound really good, and it's that accent. But back to the point. How do we practice that? How do we sharpen that grouping of three? How do I go about sharpening that grouping of three? I have this book here. It's called Fusion Drum Styles by James Morton. So that's what it looks like. Okay, and in it, I love this book. In it, there's a ton of fusion style, eighth note grooves, right? Eighth notes on the hi-hat. What I do, and I'll show you what a page of this book looks like. For reference, I mean, every page is like this. Like, so many eighth note grooves. Like, all easily accessible and fun to play. So what I do is I go through this book. What I'd recommend if you're new to playing these kind of grooves, play them as is. So you think about this as a progression. So I'll have an example here, and we'll pull up an example groove that we can use. Okay, so for this groove that is now being displayed, the first thing you're going to want to do is just play it as is. Don't worry about accents on the hi-hat. Focus on the hi-hat, but don't worry about accents yet. Just play it as an eighth note groove. All right, so here's what it would sound like. Okay, so that's the groove. There's no accents yet, right? Once you get that feeling good, you keep doing that, you keep doing that, you keep doing that. Next thing you want to do, still eighth notes on the hi-hat, but work in that accent on not the first hi-hat hit, but the second, every other hi-hat hit. Work on establishing that accent because that feel is going to translate to the groupings of three. It's essentially the same sort of accent. It's the same accent. You're accenting it on the same place. So let's go ahead and get that accent on the eighth note. So this is the next step towards developing that grouping of 3. Right, so you see the difference there. We went from no accents to every other hi-hat hit accenting it, okay? So after you establish that, this is where the tricky part is going to come in. So what I do when I'm practicing this is I take a pen and I write in the third hi-hat hit, which would be the second, which goes in between each 2 hi-hat eighth note hits. And I'm going to obviously display this, and you're going to see what it looks like now when I write in that hi-hat hit, right, to make the grouping of 3. I physically go into the book and make the grouping of 3 so I can visualize it. And then once we have that grouping of 3, that's what you're going to practice, and you're not going to work on that accent yet. So don't work on that accent yet, but just practice playing the groupings of 3 without the accent. So let's hear what that sounds like. Right, so that's just the grouping of 3 without the accent. So we went from non-accented eighth notes to accented eighth notes to non-accented groupings of 3. And you can imagine where we're going to go, right? We're going to add that third, that accent on the third hi-hat hit of each grouping. Now I'm going to play it again. I'm going to slow it down a little bit because, again, you're not going to start at this speed. If you're kind of new to establishing this grouping of 3, you're not going to start at that speed. You're going to start a very slow speed. Never underestimate how much how beneficial it can be to go super, super slow. Just go super, super slow because you want to know what you're supposed to be doing on each hit. So start really slow. So this is kind of where you might start. Right, so you want to feel in control of every single hit that you're making, right? So you go as slow as you need to the point where you feel in control of every single hit. You know where every single hit is being made. Okay, so after you do that and you feel really comfortable with that, finally, we're here. We're going to start accenting that third hi-hat in the groupings. So this is what that's going to sound like. I'm going to play a little slower because I just picked a random beat, and it might not sound fantastic if I play it fast right now. I'm going to play a little slower and then maybe work up to a little faster, okay? All right, then maybe a little faster. Just see what I can do. I mean, again, this is kind of random one. I haven't practiced this one that much. But again, the point is that if you do this with, all of these grooves, I mean, you'll be able to go to any one and you'll still be able to maintain that feel. It's all about capturing that feel, right? So let's try it a little faster. All right, I don't know why I just did that weird little fill at the end there, but that's what happens. Okay, so that's the progression, right? So I love this book because I can go through all of these. I can do that same thing with all of them. I can write in the groupings of 3, all of these grooves, right, and have an infinite number of, 16 groupings of 3 16th note hi-hat grooves. I can have it like so many, like hundreds and hundreds. And those are my favorite types of grooves to play. And then eventually when you feel confident, reading these from a book, you translate that into, you start kind of creating your own. You start making up your own kind of grooves that are like that. And eventually I came up with the one that I started with that I said is my favorite. So I'll play that one again, and you can see how it kind of relates to the one that we just played in the book. Right, so I made that groove, right, by playing a bunch of these and doing the work of starting with 8 notes, then transferring the accents, then working on grouping of 3, and then working on accenting that third hi-hat in the groupings of 3. So if you don't have this book, which you might not have this book, right? Not everyone has this book. If you have another book with 8 note grooves, try it in there. See if that works. If you don't have a book at all, just try it on any 8th note groove that you like to play. So this works with anything, right? So if I play the most simple 8th note groove, I can still apply this to that. All right, so let's just play an 8th note groove. All right, so let's go through the same progression. Let's add the accents on the 8th notes, right? Okay, and then let's try groupings of 3, no accents. And then let's accent it, okay? Right? So you don't need the book. All you need is an idea for an 8th note groove, or a groove that you like to play, and you can naturally progress it into those groupings of 3. So hopefully you can take something from this. Try this out. Try to strengthen that grouping of 3 on the hi-hat, because it's something you can apply to really any groove and make it sound better. It's all about making it sound better, and it starts with that grouping of 3, but the real important part is that accent, okay? So try it out. Hopefully this helped you or gave you some advice, or maybe, if you do try it out, let me know in the comments. And if you liked what you saw, feel free to subscribe or like the video. So thank you. Good luck.